Some of you may not know, but I have a long association with Judith Van Beek. He used to work for me many years ago, and in those days he used to whistle to his staff, but we discussed it and we didn't think that the dignitaries such as you are would appreciate being whistled at, so we didn't do that. We just made a very gentle call. And so we now have Sean Bevan, and of course the lights went out. I don't know why the lights went out. It was either they were stunned at Sean about to speak, or the fact that Baden Barber just walked in the room. It was simultaneous. It was one of them caused it, and I'm not sure which. But anyway, let's hand over to Sean, and he's promised that he'll be as efficient as he possibly can. Welcome, Sean.
Thanks, Rick. Well, here goes. The lights haven't gone out. I have sent my presentation in to the organisers. You'll find it on the website for this conference. I'm just going to summarise each slide quickly as it comes on the screen. I'll be asking the technical guys down the back there to shift the slide as I get to it. So I've got to go through this pretty rapidly, so I hope what I can say is clear. But I repeat again that after listening to what happened in Havelock North, it does pale into insignificance for me to a certain extent, and I find it quite a salutary lesson this morning listening to it. But economics is also about people as well, jobs and incomes, so I think it's still quite relevant. So what I've been asked to do is to talk about the economic importance of the water in the Heretaunga Plains, and I'll talk also about the wider Hawke's Bay region. Can we move over another slide, please? I happen to think, and really after working on my own as an economist for 15 years or so, that we need always to have a balanced approach. I input the economic perspective, other people will input the social, cultural, environmental. I won't die in a ditch over economic matters, but I often get asked, and it's been one of my main lines of work for a number of years, what are the economic benefits of certain situations, events, facilities, and the like? And I certainly try and point out those. There are downsides as well, but I think there is a need for a balanced approach. I think Hawke's Bay people, quality of life is very important. It's not just all about economics. That's why we live here. And I'm struck by the number of people who come back to live in this region after many, many years away. And I find it quite exciting, really. So we do have a good region in which we are living, and water is quite crucial to that. Next slide, please. When I was preparing this presentation, it took me back to my days at Massey University studying economics, and in particular Economics 1, and we started off with microeconomics, and we looked at resources. And we were taught there that water is one of the natural economic resources. So I think economic perspectives are highly relevant to this discussion as well. The law of scarcity, I always remember that. Even with the country endowed with resources, because wants are unlimited, there will always be scarcity, shortage of resources. And once we make decisions on the use of resources, choices, we then incur opportunity costs. And I think they are very important principles. And I was thinking about that this morning on my way over here from Napier. Councils are faced with making opportunity cost decisions every day of their working operations. So it is relevant as well. So water, a natural resource, but we do face the law of scarcity, and this is as relevant to this region as to many others. Next slide, please. Now last year, and this was mentioned yesterday morning at the conference, the different authorities in Hawke's Bay released the latest regional economic development strategy. And like all good economic development strategies, stressing the need for more employment, more investment, more industry, and so forth. And I think that's an important context to what I'm talking about this morning, the relationship between water and economic development. Next slide, please. Just two or three supply side matters. First of all, as a geographer, I'm always interested in how we compare with other regions in New Zealand, and I do work in other parts of the country, so I'm very interested in what happens in those areas. I just note that in terms of total amount of rainfall annual average, that Hawke's Bay is amongst the lowest, and therefore we can't be complacent about the use of our resources. Quite surprised that places like Christchurch actually have less rain than we do, and Queenstown and Dunedin. But we are certainly well down in terms of the annual amount of rainfall. Next slide. Now, to me, the main water sources for our local economy are the sea and estuaries, for fishing and aquaculture and recreation and tourism. The Heretaunga Aquifer, it provides water for households. Now, that's very relevant after the discussion this morning. It's absolutely vital, isn't it? Households are our basic economic unit, and good health is critical in terms of the workforce and labour force. And our rivers flowing through the Heretaunga Plains for fishing, sport and recreation and tourism. Let's not forget the importance of water to tourism. We highlight our region externally often about its pristine nature to a certain extent, and water is part of that. It's also servicing the needs of our visitors as well. Next slide, please. Now, this was mentioned yesterday by Liz Lambert from the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. I won't repeat it too much in detail, but of the vast amount of rainfall that billions of cubic metres seems to indicate, 50% goes out to sea, and the rest travels through regional aquifers. And our own Heretaunga Aquifer accounts for about 35% of the Hawke's Bay total aquifer water supply. And 5% of this is consented for annual domestic and industry use. Next slide, please. So that graph up there, now economists always use graphs. This is my first one of two or three. You'll be pleased to note. And you can see that irrigation accounts for the over half of our consented water use. And that irrigation water is especially important for vegetable growing, grapes, pip fruit, sheep beef farming and dairying, while for industry, processing of all the different types of industry in our region, water is very important there. The next slide, information for this courtesy of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Sector trends it shows you there. And so the top curve there, if you can see it, is showing the total consented water take, if you like, from the regional supply. At the bottom, we've got the public water supply. Now, that's stayed quite stable over time. This is going back to 1980, so quite stable since that period. And which I find interesting because we've had quite a lot of household growth over that time. The population hasn't grown so much as households, and therefore the water supply has stayed relatively stable. The industrial water supply graph, which is the line above it, that has taken off, but has flattened over the last 10 years a bit. And then the gap between industrial and total, that is the irrigation component, and that has certainly increased a lot. And when I did this presentation, that whole issue of water supply for irrigation really struck me how important it is in our region. Can we just move over to the next slide, please? Now, the next table there, or slide, shows you a table of GDP and employment. And what it shows you is that 60% of our total GDP in the primary sector and manufacturing is involved with water-using industries. So again, water is very critical to our industrial growth and development. Next slide, please. I just did a bit of research in preparing for this presentation, information provided by the Irrigation New Zealand national body. Over half of all our horticultural land in Hawke's Bay is irrigated, and about 2% of our pastoral land. The total farm gate value of irrigation is about 3.6 times that land without irrigation, and the New Zealand figure is 3 times. The horticultural focus of this region tends to push it up above the national result. And the Hawke's Bay net farm gate value, that's the difference between irrigated value and non-irrigated, we're the 4th highest in the country. I think it's Canterbury and Otago are 1 and 2. Now, this information has come from a study by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research, and in their publication, they were talking about a gross margin for irrigated land for pip fruit and viticulture of just under $10,000 per hectare. Now, that is a high figure, but I have seen places like in Alexandria with cherry growing, it's up into the mid-20s. So again, just reinforcing the value of irrigation. We'll just move on to the next one, please. Now, in preparing for this presentation, the Hastings District Council referred me to a report that had been prepared in 2012 for Ngāti Kahungunu, and it was on the economic value of selected water bodies. It's in my presentation if you want to follow that up. But their objective was to estimate the total economic value of key water bodies within the Hawke's Bay area, and water bodies were aquifers, rivers, streams. And their focus was on irrigation, stock water, industry use, and public water supply. The consultants who produced the report calculated a total value in that year, 2012, for all these water bodies in the wider Hawke's Bay area of about $311 million, and the Hiratonga Aquifer accounted for 45% of that. They also produced some figures showing the value of these water bodies per hectare and the impact on certain types of agriculture. And horticulture, again, coming up very high in that analysis. Next page, please, or slide. This is a graph, another graph. Now, this shows you the economic value of selected water bodies on the, left-hand side of the graph. You can see irrigation is the major, about 90% of the total value of agricultural land irrigated. And on the right-hand side there, the breakdown between irrigation, stock, domestic water use, and industry and commercial. So again, highlights for me how important water is for irrigation in this region. Can we just move over to the next slide, please? What I've tried to do on this slide is to point the way forward economically. When I do forecasting, I like to look back over as long a period as I can, because over those periods you've got ups and downs in the cycle. And it seems to me that this Hawke's Bay region, and most indicators, growing on average annually about 1 to 2%. So on that basis, if we just continue forward, that's the sort of growth I think we're likely to have in the Hawke's Bay area. I noticed that the Hiratonga Plains Urban Development Study, which was released last year or early this year, I had some input into that. They're talking about population growth of about 12% and household growth of about 21%. That will certainly have an impact on the water supply. On the horticultural side, the Horticulture New Zealand, the National Industry Board, is looking to double horticulture production across New Zealand by 2020. I think we just have to be aware of that. Let's not forget about tourism again. That's growing at about 1% per annum historically, so that will continue. I think we're going through quite a strong growth phase at the moment, by the way, since 2012. But over the long term, it all settles down, I think, to a much more manageable growth level. Next slide, please. This is just a quote from the Regional Development Strategy document Matariki, Hawke's Bay, released last year. It says, our competitive advantage is built on the foundation of fertile land, a quality water supply, a favourable climate, and the ability to produce and export world-leading quality products. So I think that gives us an indication of the direction that we're going from an economic perspective as well. Next slide, please. So, just in summary, what my analysis for this presentation has shown, that water is vital for our region from an economic perspective, for our day-to-day household operations, the quality of our workforce, including the health of the workforce, maintaining our agricultural and horticultural production, increasing productivity in these sectors. We also have to meet our industry processing needs. Let's not forget about our many service businesses, and I note that a lot of those were implicated in the Havelock North water issue as well. Improving our quality of life and our physical environment, and the further development of our tourism and recreation sectors. Water is important to all those. And just my final slide, please. Just before coming to or preparing for this presentation, I was just reflecting on what all this information meant for me. What was I able to draw out of it? And these are the things that came home to me. Water is a vital community, and I put that before economic resource for our region. Primary production still at the heart of our economy. Water, irrigated water, is a key input to this sector. The local importance of our own Heritonga aquifer. I anticipate there'll be further growth in water demand. Let's not forget the fact water is a scarce economic resource. We need high quality management and use of our water resource at all levels, and that starts with me and households. Every time I go and turn the hot water on in my home, my wife rushes over to me, turn it off, she says. So I've got to learn as well. The question of possible charging for water, well, I've done a bit of research on that. Simply, we can't do it at the moment. Having said that, and reading some information on the internet, some industries in this country believe they are being charged for water. So I think there's a bit of doubt as to who is being charged and how they're doing it. But that's going to have to be thought through carefully. I know I've read the stuff about water bottling. You need to be balanced in all this. That it creates jobs and employment and incomes. We've got to balance that all the time, social, cultural, and the like. And in the end, it's the people will decide, not an economist on their own. But it does create work, but we've got to have the right industry, of course, in this region. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Sean. Questions for Sean? Well, we have them. Nick first down here, and then we'll go. If we could just keep it to these three, that would be good, since they were the three that went bang.
Thanks very much. I'm Nick Jones from the District Health Board. One of the things that we are concerned about is that we measure not only the economic benefit in terms of, say, something like GDP, but also the impact on the distribution of that growth within the population. And the reason we're concerned is because we see very strong correlations between the disparities between the well-off and the not-so-well-off and actually health outcomes. And I just wonder whether you could comment on whether, when you're looking at that connection between the use of water and maximising the economic gains from it, whether we can also look at how it impacts on the distribution of those gains within society.
Yeah, thanks very much. I totally agree with you. I haven't done that in this report, other than to say that the Matariki Regional Development Strategy talked about the need to reduce income disparities in the region. You know, I do work for a voluntary organisation in Napier. We deliver furniture to, and out in Hastings here, And I find it quite salutary of some of the households that we go into, and how great the people are in thanking us for this furniture that we deliver to them. And I find it really sort of coming from a middle classy background, going into some of those places. And I think we really do need to think a lot about the people who are not benefiting from all the growth. So I think the whole equity argument is very important. And I am forever researching and producing figures about income levels between Hawke's Bay and New Zealand, and then again between different parts of the region. Again, I work as a consultant. I only get asked to do work by clients when they want it. I haven't covered that area specifically.
I just think there's a danger in thinking we need to maximise the economic output per litre of water if it results in unhealthy people.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Next question just in the front here. Then, Aki, you're next.
Thank you. Yes, David Appleton, private researcher. Thank you very much for your information-packed presentation there. Very much appreciated. I have one small point there, that when you listed the major sources of fresh water in Hawke's Bay, you separated out the Heritonga Plains aquifer from the rivers, when in fact the aquifer is only an extension of the Narororo and Tutaikuri rivers. Why did you do that?
No particular reason other than to say that the focus given to me was just on the whole study was the Heritonga Plains area, and the fact is that information was available to that level. No technical reason, just a matter of the focus of the overall conference, if you like, geographically speaking. Yeah. You'll notice in my study I did use regional figures as well as more localised figures.
Yes. And when you give rainfall figures for the different areas across the country, I wonder where those recordings come from, particularly for Hawke's Bay, because our major water source is from the heavy rainfall along the inland mountain chain and not out towards the coast.
Yes.
And again, that ties in with using the water from those rivers.
Yes. This information, I couldn't get it down to a regional level, like regional council regions, but it had it for the title was Cities of New Zealand, and so I had to use those really. Right. And it only had Napier, not Napier Hastings. I've just put Napier Hastings together. I presume about the same rainfall amounts between the two areas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Aki. I'll make this the last question.
Yeah, that's good. We're on time.
Kia ora, Sean. Thank you very much for that informative presentation. Given that our annual rainfall is one of the lowest in the country, it seems to me that going forward, if we switch on the Heritonga Plains, our farming techniques, say, into biodynamic, where the earth is able to retain its own water in a living soil condition, that could ease up irrigation needs and could, in the long run, stop the choking of the golden goose. Because if we continue to do that, we will not have golden eggs for breakfast every day, in my opinion. So do you think economically that this is an opportunity for us to take a serious look at our farming practices and our land uses?
Absolutely, and perhaps one of our regional council colleagues could comment on that, because I think that's the heart of a lot of the work that they're doing.
Yes, because what will that help us do with the change of land use is help probably the water quality in our rivers, because we at Kohupatiki have our eye on soft tourism. Our river is being prepared now for it historically, culturally, and community-wise. So that's what I would like to offer. We need to change our practices so that the earth is quite capable of retaining its own moisture.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you, Aki, and thank you, Sean, for your presentation. And we'll move on. But before we do, I would just like to address that issue, Aki. I mean, there's no doubt about it. for 150 years we've done certain things. We've deforested New Zealand, we've farmed in a certain way, and we're going to have to look at everything because there's no doubt about it. We have got ourselves into this mess as a community. We all did it, not one little section, not this bloke or this bloke. We all did it, and now we've all got to try and fix it together. And we will be looking at new ways of farming. Our farmers will be absolutely right. Now, our next speaker, and we're into the after smoko session, you'll be pleased to note, is Tina Poro. Where is Tina? Is she here? Here she is. Welcome to the stage. Now, I don't know Tina, so I'm going to be, and I'm not sure that many of you do, but I'm going to greatly enjoy her presentation, which is basically around water and our treaty partners. Is that correct?
I'll get into it.
Josh, she's going to tell us what it is. Okay, the floor is yours.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, e hui hui mai nei I tēnei rā, he mihi atu ki ngā whanaunga mai ngā tika hungunu. Ko wai au, ko Tina Porau tōku ingoa, ki te taho taku māma no ngā tika hungunu rā kai pāka, me Ngāti Tūwhare Toa, ki te taho taku pāpa no Ngāti Porau me Ngai Tāmanuhiri rongo whakata. Engari, he mihi poto tēnei, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. So just say hi. I wanted to acknowledge firstly Ngāhiwi Tomoana who has nicely invited me here today, and it's really nice for me particularly to be here because I am from Ngāti Kahungunu. My grandfather's Ben Christie from Rākai Pāka, Nuhaka and Mahia, and so it's really nice to be able to be here in his iwi and my iwi to talk about these issues. So I wanted to explain to you today a little bit about Te Mana o Te Wai and the Freshwater Iwi Leaders Group and the work that we're doing across the country to try and create a much more holistic view of how New Zealand should be dealing with water quantity and water quality. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. So this is not the Māori view. We are not a hive mind. So just like your families and your governments and local governments, you have multiple views on multiple issues. However, it's important, I guess, to explain some perspectives of some communities in the Māori world and how they feel about water. So you may have read in the newspapers this thing called a Freshwater Iwi Leaders Group or the Iwi Chairs Forum, and I wanted to just take a moment to be able to explain exactly who and what that is. So the Iwi Chairs Forum, firstly, is not a silver bullet. And not every iwi and not every hapu or Māori individual sees this as the best way to engage on these issues. But a lot do. And so it's a coalition of the willing. And for us, that means we have 70 tribes who are represented on the Iwi Chairs Forum. And they send their chairs to this discussion that we have every quarter across the rohe. The key outcomes of our discussions have been about systemic issues. Every iwi and hapu are dealing with a multitude of matters that they have to address, and unlike most organisations, Māori, iwi, hapu and whānau are often dealing with issues like mini-governments. So we don't partition up well-being. It is a consistent and important part of how we advocate, so culturally, socially, environmentally and economically. But some of the systemic issues that are affecting Māori have been difficult to address in each hapu and iwi as we're all dealing with the issues that we have in our own rohe. So the Iwi Chairs Forum was set up to try and deal with those wider issues that affect all Māori. And the Iwi Chairs Forum has no mandate to discuss anything on behalf of iwi and hapu. Mana whenua, mana wai remains with the iwi. But they give the Iwi Chairs Forum some mandate to be able to explore the wider issues that affect us all. In the Iwi Chairs Forum, we have the Pou Taiao. And for us, that means we are looking at issues around climate change, oil and minerals, conservation, and fresh water. And that has become quite a large part of the issues that the iwi want us to look at. This looks weird trying to do it like that. So the Iwi Leaders Group has two clear priorities. And the first is Te Mana o Te Wai, And the second is making sure that our communities, as sometimes new users in the water system, have access to water. And that's not just about commercial access, but it's also about drinking water and for cultural purposes. And this isn't about entitlement, which often I hear lots of people call for. It's about equity of share. And that's the conversation we're wanting to have with the wider environments that we live in. So the iwi Leaders Group has been working quite closely alongside the Ministry for the Environment and the National Party and Māori Party to try and create some outcomes in a policy framework to ensure that our advocacy gets some teeth. The first area we've worked on is the Resource Management Act amendments. And so we've gone around the country, we go around the country every year and we talk to all of the rohe across the motu, and it was clear to us as Māori that, and I refer to the comments made earlier, that we all did this, we all put us in this position. Well, not all of us did. Some of us were not in the decisions around the council tables, and particularly Māori have been locked out in many communities from making decisions over their manawai and their mana whenua. So they firmly feel that if they were part of the decision, we wouldn't be in the environmental state that we currently are in. So a key part of what we were trying to do is ensure that our people had a chance to be involved in decisions over manawai and mana whenua. The Resource Management Act has been changed, and the new law has enabled a mechanism called mana whakahono ārohe. And it was a response to some iwi who are dealing with real concerns in their councils that they are not getting heard. And in fact, even some who have had treaty settlements, the councils are struggling to figure out how to give effect to those. In some cases, they're using the treaty settlements as the ceiling. And what we're saying is, no, they're the floor. They are the vehicle for us to join together and collaborate to grow our mutual understandings of what the environment should look like. So mana whakahono ārohe agreements are legislatively bound requirements on councils to engage with iwi. And it doesn't prescribe what the agreements need to be. Those are up to the councils and the iwi to collaborate and negotiate those outcomes. And you know, I'm an environmental planner. I have worked in the planning framework for the last 20 years. And often I think there's a deep-seated fear that this will break democracy. Well, democracy only works for the majority. And even if you think that everybody can stand as a councillor and get in, if you are brown, it is just harder. And that is the reality of this system. So what we're trying to do is enable this conversation to happen. And if you talk to those councils who have already embraced co-management and co-governance, they will tell you this has worked much better than they ever thought. The sky did not fall because a Māori was sitting around the table and advocating for the water. But there is still an ingrained fear of having that sharing of responsibility. It's not at this stage about rights. It is about sharing the responsibilities. So mana whakahono is a way in which the Māori Party, the National Party and the iwi Leaders Group thought that we could enable a deeper conversation that went beyond having a hui at a marae and saying we ticked that box, we talked to that hapu, kia ora. So that's one mechanism. The next is the National Policy Statement on Freshwater and the National Objectives Framework. And so it has been in there for quite some time, but the reference to te mana o te wai has been very difficult, we understand, for councils to give effect to. So we want to be able to support councils to understand how best to give effect to their treaty partnership. And often councils have said in the past, oh, we're not the treaty partners, the Crown are. That's just not true. Everybody who lives in this country is a treaty partner. You were enabled to come here because of the treaty. And so it's our responsibility as New Zealanders to understand what that means and give effect to it. But we recognise that that's still new for some people, even though we've been here for 200 years together. And so we're trying to build tools to support councils to give effect to te mana o te wai. And so I wanted to give you an understanding of what Te Mana o Te Wai is this morning. So Te Mana o Te Wai has had a type of evolution, and every iwi has a Te Mana o Te Wai type discussion. The language may be different, the kupu, the words may be different, but there are some consistent universals across all the iwi around our tikanga when it comes to our relationship with water. So in the last 3 months, we've been going around the country, the iwi leaders group, and talking to our people about what that actually is. Because I think even for us, in terms of being able to grow our capability and capacity in iwi, we are on a journey as well. Lots of people will come to us and say, well, what does this mean? How do you give effect to treaty rights and responsibilities in water? And we've said, you just have to. Because we haven't had the chance to sit down together, have a non-reactive discussion about what Te Mana o Te Wai is. And that's what the iwi leaders group is trying to facilitate this year. So as we went around the country asking our whānau, what is Te Mana o Te Wai, and what does that mean in terms of an allocation regime, we had some really specific outcomes of what that looked like. This is a hoha thing. Okay, so when I went to all the hui, I am, like I said, I'm an environmental planner, but I am very much about enabling sustainable use. Our people were not just protectors, we were users, we were developers, we were commercial gurus back when people were still struggling how to work that out. So we have a long history of being commercial users of water, but within limits. So I went around the country saying, right, we're going to talk about, allocable flow and how does that look like for a Māori sustainable use as new users in the system. And I was constantly reminded and humbled that it is not about allocable flow. Our people are struggling with quality and quantity at a personal level. And here in Kahungunu, I think there is no better example of how people are struggling with just the basics of drinking water. And I thought that that was going to be an isolated example, and it's not. It is a consistent theme across Māori communities that they do not have adequate access to fresh drinking water, and that is just wrong. And the other, burden on those communities is that they are among the most economically depressed communities in this country. So we are asking those who cannot afford it to struggle and try and buy their water. And I'll give you an example. So in Muriwai, where my dad's from, just outside of Gisborne, there's a community there of 53 households. The Gisborne Council's water supply comes from the Ārai River, which is their tipuna awa. They have to pay to buy in water tanks, truck tank water, every summer from their own awa at a cost this summer of $22,000, when the median income in that community is $24,000. So they literally get to see the pipe taking their water past their village into Gisborne, and then they're paying the water tanks to bring it back in. That is not right. And it is not uncommon. So even when they did a process, one of the marae there at Pāhau did a process to get the infrastructure out to Muriwai. They got their own funding to do it. They got the pipe, but it was going to cost $1,800 for every person to then hook up. Sorry, $1,800. Where are they going to find that when they are hand to mouth? What happens, like it did this summer with a drought? And how do they justify the over-allocated Ārai River that is going to the horticultural irrigation when they can't even drink their own water? So this is really common across the country, and so that flavours a lot of the discussions we've had with our hapu whānau and iwi about the allocable flow. They definitely, and again, this is a massive generalisation, everyone has different issues, but as a whole, whānau do want a higher value attributed to water. They feel that if they did that, people would be more efficient and more effective with their use of water. They haven't yet worked out what that looks like, but they are very open to a system that enables a transfer to best use. And these are the types of things that we're developing over the year. And that last sign was in near Lake Omapere up north. So they have the branded ministry-approved fresh drinking water. That shouldn't be happening in a country like ours. Whānau do want to have an allocation of water. They have been locked out, particularly in over-allocated catchments, but also in under-allocated catchments. And I'll give you an example of that. There is a whānau that live in Riparoa who, for no fault of their own, had their land taken under a lease, $1 a year lease. We've got a lot of these. Finally get their land back and decide, awesome, we've got our land back. We had to fight hard for that. We're going to develop it for the good of our community and the good of our beneficiaries. But they went to the council and said, we're ready to go. We've got the money, we've got the land, and we want a water allocation. They said, totally, but you are 62nd on the list. So for no fault of this hapu and whānau, they are now locked out of the system, and there is no way for them to get back in. So it is clear that this is not working in a first in, first served allocation system. But not only is it not working for Māori, it is also not working for new users who want to get into the system to use the land for more sustainable uses than what they currently are now. So this is a New Zealand problem. So as I said, the first in, first served allocation system doesn't work for us, and neither does the clicker. And so our whānau have been really clear that they want to be able to have an allocation of water to do two things. One, to achieve te mana o te wai, which I'll explain, and two, to have a sustainable use enabled in their own rohe. And so those are very altruistic outcomes. And in terms of the allocation, when I went around the country and said, what are you going to use your allocation for? And they said, clearly, we're going to put it back in the rivers. I was like, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean you're going to put it back in the rivers? And they're like, well, that is our responsibility. If we get an allocation of water, we want to put it back in the awa. And then I said, well, why should Māori carry the disproportionate burden of everybody else's uses? You know, we didn't create this mess. Why should we be the only ones to clean it up and use our allocation to fix everyone else's paru? So what we're trying to create is a system-wide change that means that the costs of water, negative water outcomes are internalised on the users, not the ratepayers and not Māori. And so these are the types of transformational change that we want to transition to. And we're not saying we're going to do it in 5 years. It took lots of people, lots of years to get it in the state we are, but we are committed to turn back that clock. Te mana o te wai is very simply, the first right to water goes to water, not people. That's all it is. Te mana o te wai means that we don't get the first go, the awa does. The ecosystems within it, the taiao around it, the environment around it, and the only part of it that we get in the beginning, this protection phase, is can we jump in the water and drink it or swim in it without getting sick. So it's te hauora o te taiao, the health of the environment, te hauora o te tangata, the health of the person, and te hauora o te wai, the health of the wai. Those are the three key components of the first part of te mana o te wai. Te mana o te wai is a continuum. And it used to be a balanced approach. And then going around the country, we realised you cannot have a balanced approach when it's so out of sync with where it needs to be. So what we're saying now is priority is given to the first part of te mana o te wai. First right of water goes to water. Once you've set that limit, and limit setting should not be balancing economic and personal aspirations on limits. That's a separate conversation. It's an important one, but it's a second conversation. So once limits are set without everybody vying for it with their agendas, because this is political, when it comes to setting limits, everybody has to collaborate, everybody gets in the room and they start entrenching in their agendas. And it's just human nature. We start fighting for the water and seeing who can advocate the strongest. We have farmers, foresters, fishermen, we're all the same too. We have these multiple users of the water. But if you don't take those conversations away from setting the first right for water, it will fail, and it has to date. The second part of that conversation, and this is the ohanga, and Ngāhui and I just talked this morning about those types of terms. Ohanga is about enabling sustainable use within a limit. So we want to develop too. We are really focused on the growth and the more, I guess, principled choices around land use that we need to transition to. We know as people who are heavily reliant on our whenua that what we are doing isn't working. But we too need support to transition into new land uses. So the next part of Te Mana o Te Wai is how do you give economic growth within limits? The third part of Te Mana o Te Wai is around the well-being, the hauora. How do you sustain the gains you've made? How do you rehabilitate the areas that haven't been able to be looked after very well? And then how do you keep that cycle going? And that is very simply Te Mana o Te Wai. And I think it would be very difficult for anyone from any community to disagree with that. But we do every day in these conversations that become deeply political. And in those political conversations, when only council-elected staff and members, council-elected members are making the discussion, generally Māori are not there. And if they are there, there is only one voice, and that is not a treaty partnership. I'm just about done. So we're talking about Te Mana o Te Wai as being sacrosanct, and then Toha Toha o Te Wai, which is the sharing part, becomes what happens after Te Mana o Te Wai is achieved. And what we have seen consistently is the degradation of our waterways, of our aquifers, of our groundwater, and no one can disagree that we're going the wrong way. And part of it is because it's not a principled approach. It's an outcomes approach. So these are the key principles that are driving the enabling of Te Mana o Te Wai. And I won't go into them here, but happy to support if you guys want to learn more. Because that's one of the key reasons that I'm going around the country and talking about these matters. We are not trying to bombard you with concepts that we're not going to support you to understand. But you do need to ask the questions. And I think that's the challenge for everybody in our community, to not be scared of integrating a more holistic view of what water means. So Ngāti Porou, one of my dad's iwi, have come up with a very simple statement, and every iwi has been doing this work. I know Kahungunu had a symposium on water a couple of weeks ago. We've been around the country hearing people's kōrero, but each iwi is starting to develop their position on wai. For Ngāti Porou, it's really simple. We have a right of say, of decision making over the wai. We have a responsibility to protect the wai. It's not just about rights and interests. It's actually a responsibility. And as we're going around the country, we don't even talk about ownership. It's the media that are telling you that that's what Māori are talking about. But I'm actually talking to Māori and listening to Māori, and we are not talking about ownership. We are talking about responsibilities and use. So these are key messages that I think, aren't getting out strongly enough in our country. Our people do not own their tipuna. We see the waterways as our ancestors. We do not see them as an asset or part of a capital structure. But we recognise that that's how the Western system views water, and we will use that language if it gives effect to our responsibilities. But no one that I've been talking to is explicitly discussing a ownership framework. It is much more principled and tikanga based than that. And I think everyone has a responsibility to learn what that actually means. We also have a right of access for our well-being and a right to develop, just like everybody else, but within limits. So these, and again, I'll happily give access to this through the conference organisers, so it's way too small to read, but these are the structures and the principles that we want a water allocation regime to give effect to. And these are the things that have been developed since 2012 across the country amongst iwi. So when people say, well, what do you want? Well, we want to share in that responsibility, and we want to give you some clear principles through which to guide your decisions. So, what are our plans for the coming year? The government has committed to date to talk about allocation in March of next year. And we are currently trying to develop a position to support these conversations across the country. We want to work collaboratively with councils and definitely with the community, with stakeholders, with water users, and we're spending the next year having those deeper conversations on dispelling the myths that you often hear about water and our relationship with Māori. So I wanted to end there, but to give you, I guess, again, the opportunity to come and contact us. We're happy to come and talk to your councils. We're happy to come and talk to your community groups around what we actually want and to find those areas of alignment which is better for all of us as citizens and residents of this beautiful country. So that's my kōrero today. He mihi atu ki a koutou.
Kia ora, Tina. That was absolutely sensational presentation. You might not have noticed because your back was to me, but I got a text from my Ngāti Porou mate in the audience, and basically he said, wow, we want this girl here. Mind you, he's deeply prejudiced because he thinks Jesus is Ngāti Porou as well. So
She was.
she was. So there he is over there, sculling in the corner. Anyway, that was just an amazing dress, so I'm sure we have some questions. One down here first. Zan?
Just stand up. Oh, hang on. There we go.
You can stand up. Introduce yourself, Zan.
Hi, I'm Zan Harding, Hawke's Bay Wine Growers and member of TANK. Great presentation. For my edification, maybe some other people, could you explain the difference between te mana o te wai and environmental flows?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So te mana o te wai is a holistic view of the whole environment. And we're working on the National Objectives Framework, which has siloed quantifiers of what water quality is. And a lot of the scientists that we've worked with are saying, we can develop, it's difficult, but we can develop measurements in those silos, but what we're struggling with is how all of those things are connected in a single view of water. So the difference between environmental flows is that it takes in your relationship with the awa, it takes in the land use and how it affects the flow. It's a Māori model. It's a life force model of the waterways, whereas an environmental flow is there enough water for the fish to grow? And so they're quite different things. It includes environmental flows, but it's much more depth around how you connect all of the relationships that go into making a waterway contributing to our entire well-being.
Thank you.
Baden? Hope this is not a tricky question, Baden.
He's my whanaunga.
Tēnā koe, Tina. Ngā mihi atu kia koe mo tō o kōrero. Baden Barbara Ho, Hastings District Councillor. My wife is Christy from Nuhaka, so kare kore whanaunga ki a koe. No doubt you've come across the issue of water bottling.
Yes.
Big issue here in Hawke's Bay. But in terms of te mana o te wai and some of the economic opportunities that come with water, if Ngāti Kahungunu or Ngāti Rākaipaka were to look at bottling up some of that beautiful mauri in our waters and exporting it over to China, America, or anywhere else. How does that, how does that fit with the whakaaro around te mana o te wai? Appreciating that we've had that relationship with our waterways. We've got to get drinking water to our people, but there's a whole lot of economic opportunity that's available, and we shouldn't be shutting ourselves off to it as Māori, because, we've got treaty settlements and a whole lot of things. So there's a tricky question there, but I think, it should be asked.
Yeah.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora whanaunga. Short answer is, as long as the sustainable use of the water gives effect to te mana o te wai, we're in. Because the fact is, the iwi leaders group has no mandate to determine what Kahungunu does or what Ngāti Porou does. And te mana o te wai is around your mana wai and your mana whenua. The key issue we're trying to do is create a system that means whatever that use is, it doesn't detrimentally take away from the first right of water goes to water. But, we've had kōrero around the country, and the water bottling issue has really flavoured the discussion. And it led to conversations about making a change to look at the user as well as the effects of the use. And so we're trying to develop what that looks like, but that we want to enable sustainable development, not restrict it. I think the key question I always put back to Māori when we're saying we don't want to do water bottling, I'm like, well, it's okay to export milk. So why is it okay to export all our milk to the Chinese, but it's not okay to export our water? So the key thing is not the outcome or the use, it's the how does that enable and give effect to te mana o te wai. And every water user needs to do that, whether you're Māori or not. But it's up to those iwi to determine how they give effect to that themselves.
Ken Keys here from Guardians of the Aquifer. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely fantastic. And I think everything you say should be the bedrock of what our councils look at and think about in Hawke's Bay. Absolutely amazing. I want to just cut straight to the chase politically. Are you optimistic about currently being listened to and in the future being listened to by those in power, that is our government? What's your feeling about that? Thank you.
We have a multi-layered approach. So government moves slow, the waters run fast. And so we're taking an approach that, yes, we have to have a conversation with the government, but that may take 25 years to get to transformational change. The key changes are going to happen in the regional councils and with the communities on the ground. So what we're doing is creating layers of engagement. We are definitely engaging with the Crown, and we will be fighting tooth and nail to ensure that the treaty responsibilities are given effect to. But we are also helping our iwi and hapu and whānau on the ground to communicate these issues to their councils to try and infiltrate that way. We want to be a virus. And to get to that point, we need to have some key messages that we can all agree on. And that's the type of multi-layered approach. From my personal perspective, I am very optimistic about changes at the government level, but it is going to take an environmental disaster to get there. And I spent a little bit of time in Paris a couple of years ago around climate change, and they shift, sorry, Trump's killed us all off this morning, but the response in Europe, the significant response in investing in a low emissions economy came because they had an environmental disaster. And unfortunately, I think that's what's going to take here and to force people to change, because the incremental changes to the system are too slow for the water. It's a bit doom and gloom, but I think we've got to keep working and keep advocating strongly. But I think that might be what it takes for some people to shift.
Thank you, Tina. We've just had our little disaster here, which is really given us a bit of a kick in the backside. and got us thinking. So thank you very much for your address, and I would say that when you're ready to come home to your roots in Kahungunu, we would love to have you. So thank you very much for your address. Thank you all. Pauline, you're on, mate. I'd like to welcome Pauline Doyle to the stage. Pauline is well known to me. She's one of those tireless personalities that we have in our community. She's rushing off. Those tireless personalities that we have in our community that focus on particular issues and really get into the depth of them and make us all think about them. They never give up, and her and Ken, who down there in the back, have created a great partnership around our aquifer and around protection of our aquifer. And they come along to our council meetings and they don't let us get away with anything. And I really appreciate the work that they do in a voluntary way. So welcome, Pauline.
Kia ora, and thank you for this opportunity.
You're going to be half an hour?
Half an hour, I'll try. Can you give me a bell at...
12 o'clock, that's 20
No,
minutes.
give me a bell after 15 minutes in case I need to... Can you see that? That's from a water well. It's not from an oil well, it's a water well. And Russell Bayliss from Bayliss Brothers gave me this just to show that well casings fail. Sometimes they fail. Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks for putting that up. Do I need to use this or can you? Thank you. Right, that was a great lead-in. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to cut straight to the chase because I guess quite a few of you are here wondering what we're going to say about the little disaster we've just had 10 months ago. I want to start by saying, telling you what the carpet cleaner told me when I needed a carpet cleaned in January. He said they had a lot of call-outs last August, and I said, was that for the gastro crisis? And he said, yes. I said, what happened? What did you need to do? And he said, oh, clean the carpets. A lot of people, when they got sick, had uncontrollable projectile vomiting, and worse still, he said they had uncontrollable diarrhoea. Now, you imagine if you're a mum at home with sick children and you'd need the carpets cleaned after that. That really, really brought it home to me what was happening in, I don't know, thousands of households right across the bay, not just in Havelock North last year. A lot of people in Napier and Hastings work there and from Central Hawke's Bay. And then they take it home to their families at night, and hence that massive spread that we had last year. And my guess is that a lot of people at that time were suffering in silence. They didn't go to the doctor. They stayed at home and they drank boiled water. That was after the boiled water notice came out. And my guess is that a lot of people are still suffering in silence. So I want to talk about safe drinking water. Guardians of the Aquifer is, we advocate for safe drinking water. And that was our approach when our campaign first got started back in 2012, our campaign with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council for a plan change to prohibit oil and gas from contaminating our drinking water. We're a lobby group, Guardians of the Aquifer. We don't have a cast of thousands. We have a small group of really passionate people who devote a lot of their time to making sure that our elected representatives actually represent us. We had a change in the council at the regional council last October, thanks to a lot of people's efforts, not least Guardians of the Aquifer. We had to change had to have a change of the guard in Napier and get rid of some of the councillors there who were stonewalling, basically, and naysaying any good ideas that we came up with to ensure that we all have safe drinking water throughout the whole of Hawke's Bay, not just here in Hiratonga. I'm going to talk very briefly about oil. A lot of you may not be aware that there's an oil permit that cuts straight through our water catchment area for the Hiratonga aquifer. It was owned by Endeavour Energy. They gave up when the bottom fell out of the oil market, and it'll be up for grabs again next year. Napier City Council granted consent to allow them to do seismic testing back in 2014, drilling a hole beside what I call Napier Airport, Hawke's Bay Airport, and drilling all the way back up behind Napier and Hastings for 55 kilometres right through the water catchment. Fortunately, they've given that up, but in the meantime, we've got a new council, majority on the council at Regional Council, and now they are going ahead with a plan change. And by the end of this year, if you're on my bulk email list, or if you go on our Facebook page, or on our website, fracfreehb.co.nz, then we will be alerting you to the need to support our substantive submission to Hawke's Bay Regional Council to prohibit oil and gas drilling near our water catchments right across Hawke's Bay. So well done, the new council. Rex says we grow food here, we don't grow oil. So I was going to go into a little bit of detail about the confined and unconfined aquifer, but we're short for time. So I'm just going to explain that Russell Bayliss from Bayliss Brothers, I met him in 2012 when he read an article saying, that I'd written, saying we face the threat of contamination because of oil and gas drilling. And he got heaps of phone calls from all his growers and irrigators saying, "Is this right, Russell? Is this right?" He said, "Yes, it is." And he rang me and wanted to sit down and talk to me. I didn't realise he was a well driller for water. I thought he was a well driller for oil and gas. And it took about 5 minutes for him to clarify that no, he drilled for water. And I said, "Oh, when can you come around?" Now, he's explained to me that our water that we have here, 100% of our town supply comes from that catchment area up there. And it falls as rain and snow melt and filters down through the fine soils and the gravels and so on. And some of the best water in our confined aquifer down here on the plains is 70 years old. It's wrapped, we have in our aquifer system, we have a series of what I call water channels. Some are huge, and they are wrapped around by clays and gravels which have cemented together over millions of years. And they carry that water all the way down onto the plains, down from the steep ranges, across the plains, and force it out to sea. The unique aspect about our aquifer system is that it's artesian, and that within the Hiratonga aquifer system we have confining layers. We talk about the confined aquifer, and then the next level down is the semi-confined aquifer and the unconfined aquifer. So what went wrong in Havelock North on the 6th of August last year? What went wrong there was that we didn't have the in Havelock North and Brookvale Road bores 1 and 2, they draw from the semi-confined aquifer. So it's already vulnerable. And council staff there should have known that it was a non-artesian source. So the two ingredients for really good, safe drinking water in Napier, Hastings and Havelock North is that combination of artesian, which is that force of that hydraulic force coming down from the mountain range and up through, can we change the slide? And up through your wells so that you have this beautiful result that you see on the overhead behind me. We have that in central parts of Hastings and in Napier, but not in Flaxmere and not in Havelock North. There are many similarities between Flaxmere and Havelock North. So in Havelock North, I better go to my more detailed notes. Can you hear me if I stand like this? Oh, good. So I'm up to page 2. You can tell I like writing. So I've finished that. I just want to read to you a talking point which Ken Keys down there, he's the other spokesperson for Guardians of the Aquifer. Ken Keys and I wrote this talking point. What happened was it's a talking point that appeared in Hawke's Bay Today back on the 12th of April. The presence of sheep faeces has been identified as part of the cause of contamination, but questions still remain as to how this contaminated surface water ended up in the kitchen taps all over Havelock North. According to evidence presented to the water inquiry, just 3 months before, Council's maintenance contractor inspected the wellheads of the municipal supply in Brookvale Road. But instead of climbing down the ladder, he simply lifted the manhole and looked. He peered in, he couldn't see any water on the floor and assumed that all was well. However, if he'd climbed down the ladder, he might have discovered leaking around the seal of the entry point for the main supply pipe, and he might have discovered the loose seals around the electrical cabling entering the bore itself. All of this is in the evidence presented to the water inquiry. You can find it on the government website, which we'll put up in the last slide. Meanwhile, Hastings District Council maintains that its bores were not the problem, saying it believes the nearby pond full of sheep dung contaminated the actual aquifer itself. However, neighbours in Brookvale Road drank from their own bores, which draw from the same aquifer, and they did not get sick, which throws suspicion back on the council's boreheads. Mayor Lawrence Yule sat through a lot of the evidence presented at the hearings, so it is a mystery how he could claim that, quote, it seems unlikely that the outbreak was caused by any infrastructure failing, unquote. That was in his opinion piece back on February the 15th. February 15th was the same day that a list of failures by the council was outlined at the water inquiry hearing, giving a completely contrary view. It's time Hastings District Council did the right thing and drilled new bores for Havelock North. The last one it drilled was in 1991. There's been rapid population growth since then. Well drillers inform us that municipal bores generally need replacing after 25 years. Bore 1 was drilled 35 years ago, the newest one 26 years ago. Note, it was inspected 3 months before. If the council's maintenance contractor had done his job properly, this whole disaster might not have happened. But because Hastings District Council didn't require a physical inspection 3 months earlier, we'll never know if the disaster could have been avoided. Because Hastings Council didn't get stuck in and do their own physical inspections straight after the storm and the power failure, conclusive evidence was lost. Hastings District Council cannot prove that their bores were not to blame. That's quite a claim, isn't it? I'm going to give you some more examples of evidence from the water inquiry, evidence which is on the website, but which the public was not able to see because it didn't get presented at the hearing. I want to just show you now the video, brief video of the council accepting responsibility for what happened.
I guess this is a sign of solidarity in terms of the council, and you know where we want to move to, which is rectifying, fixing what's been broke, and making sure this doesn't happen again. Can't happen again. Full stop.
I think we all feel at least we have got to the bottom of the issue, and if nothing else, that was particularly important because you can't make progress unless you know what the problem is.
You know, our CEO, as the leader of the operations of this organisation, you know, he's fronting and we're back.
We are very, very sad and sorry that but we're all here today, and as we've heard, we're going to make this right.
We are all, you know, collectively totally sympathetic to all those people who actually were affected by it, and actually that's one of the most foremost things, you know, that have been in our mind.
We are accountable as a whole organisation, and one of the things that's been raised is what happened in 1998, and some people think, well, you should have known and all the rest of it. Well, there is a clear systemic failure in the record keeping, the people and all the rest of it. So none of the people that are here now, you know, in the operational sense were here then. The learnings from them were not, that was identified in the inquiry. We can't actually blame, we can have a view on what those people did, but none of the people here today actually were responsible for that. But nonetheless, as an organisation, as a council, in that respect alone, we should have done better than what we're doing. And we are collectively being accountable for what has happened, and we've looked at what that accountability means. And in our collective view, the best thing we can do to be accountable is to fix it and to support the staff that are in the best position to fix it in the shortest possible time.
Well, there's been a degree of angst among the staff that, you know, this has happened on their watch, and that they feel very accountable for it, and particularly for the failings that have been found. But they are also focused, and the council's made it quite clear that they expect to have these issues fixed, and that is the highest priority. So that is giving the staff a clear purpose. But you know, it's you know, they, I would say that the staff, as Councillor Heap said, feel for the people that were affected by this, and you know, that the reminders of that go on.
Every now and again in communities' lives, you have to do some things that are right. So we are apologising to the whole community for what's happened, even though we did not cause it. And we're accepting accountability for it. And our only way of dealing with that accountability collectively is to fix it. And that's what we're committed to doing.
We've all got to really take a good look at ourselves. What are we doing to our planet? We've all got to take responsibility, apart from the obvious, which has already been mentioned. Educating our children, making them more aware of it. So for me personally, you know, we've been abusing our planet for years, and in some way it's coming back to bite us in the backside. So we've really got to wake up.
Thanks to Hawke's Bay Today for allowing us permission to show that. Can you put up the next slide, please? This is shows water pouring into cable glands. And what I want to do is read you. Where did I put it? Oh, here we go, right on the top. Sorry. I want to read you a letter from Hastings District Council addressed to a well driller. It reads, "Dear John, we've had a contamination event at the Brookvale Road number 2 bore. As you know, subsequent investigations by ourselves and yourself found that the cable glands on the pump were only hand tight and could have been leaking groundwater down there for some time. As this well is not free flowing at all times of the year, this breach of the security of the wellhead had substantial potential for contamination. This breach has caused the council great embarrassment and has shaken the public's confidence in the council's ability to adequately manage its water supply asset." I've just quoted to you from a letter dated 31st of August 1998 when 80 people became ill from Campylobacter. In 1998, the council accepted responsibility. They did an inspection and they held an inquiry. Why didn't that happen in 2016? Why didn't Hastings District Council immediately call in a well driller last year? Why was it left up to the regional council to insist that that be done? Why was it left up to the regional council to actually call in Bayliss Brothers to do that inspection? They arranged a full inspection by Bayliss Brothers the 2nd to the 6th of September. That was almost a month after the heavy rainfall event and the power outage. I'm not going to say much more there. I just want to remind you that this inquiry was a no-fault inquiry, no blame. So we've got the report that we could have expected from a no-fault inquiry. 2 years ago, Bore 3 was contaminated and had to be shut down. The cause of that contamination has not been identified. Was the aquifer the problem there, or was it something to do with the bore? That bore's been recommissioned and a huge UV treatment plant constructed beside it with filtering and chlorination added. It's a stopgap measure. It's a quick fix it, and it's a good idea when you're running out of water at the height of summer. We've now suggested in our submission to Hastings District Council that they reconnect the bore for Havelock North, sharing with Hastings in this low demand winter period, while they really get things properly sorted out. So there were two theories about what went wrong. Theory one was that it was from the 120 sheep defecating in the nearby pond, which somehow got into the aquifer and then into bore 1. This theory gets tested by Hastings District Council's people, Tonkin and Taylor, in January of this year. Theory 2 was that it was all the sheep, including the 1,600 across the road from all the bores, and surface water was seeping into the topsoil and then leaking down through the concrete walls of the dry well chamber that sits above the bore head itself in those two bores, same as in 1998. And the investigation for that was done by Bayliss Brothers. The first theory got tested by Tonkin and Taylor, as I said. They carried out dye testing in January this year. Justice Stevens was very interested in something called a zone of depletion, which occurred during that testing when surface water from the nearby sheep pond got sucked from the aquifer up into Bore 1. January is the driest part of our summer. No way were the conditions anywhere comparable to the conditions on the 6th of August last year, when we had a heavy rainfall event and a power outage. It is a nonsense, in our view, to suggest that the dye test in January accurately simulated what would have happened in Bore 1 on the 6th of August last year. I'll quickly read you from our submission, which we made to the Water Inquiry on the 10th of March. Jim Frogley owns the property at 237 Brookvale Road. He draws water at 11 metres, which is the same depth as the screen in Bore 2. He kept a record during the dye testing. His bore is approximately 15 metres away during the dye testing and pumping. He says that dye testing and pumping had no effect on his bore. His bore is approximately 15 metres away from the Mangatere stream. During the dye testing, he noticed the stream dried up behind his house completely as a result of the continuous pumping 24 hours a day, 7 days. No one in his household became ill in August last year. In March, when I last spoke to Jim, he told me that the stream was back to normal and is clean and free-flowing, quote, just the way it used to be before it started to be used for municipal supply for Havelock North. The Millwoods own the property at 236 Brookvale Road. Their bore is closest to that sheep pond, and no one at 236 Brookvale Road became ill during the outbreak last year. Michael Whitaker owns and manages Tomato Mushrooms. Their main bore, he told me, is depth of 12 metres. Their main bore supplies the 120 staff. Only 3 of those staff got sick, and they went home to Havelock North at night and drank the water from the town supply. The Regional Council tested all the bores in the vicinity of the council bores. All the test results were clear. Theory number 2 is that it came from poor maintenance of the bores themselves. On 29th of September, tests for water tightness were carried out by Bayliss Brothers at bores 1 and 2. The roadside drains which pass around the well chambers were flooded, recreating the conditions similar to 5th and 6th of August. It was observed that the surface water soaked down through the soil and leaked into the dry well chamber of Bore 2, coming through the gaps around the electrical conduits where they enter the wall. You've already heard me say this. That happened in 1998. They timed it. It took only 33 minutes for this surface groundwater to flood the base of the pit and overtop that flange, flowing down into the bore via the gaps around the bore glands where the electrical conduits enter the bore itself. Both bores had similar problems with surface groundwater leaking through the wall seals around the supply pipes and then going into the community water supply and ending up in the kitchen taps all over Havelock North. I was going to read, well, yes, I will. Have I got time? Hope so. No, I haven't got time. This is Bayliss Brothers' report. You can find it on the website, the government website for the government inquiry. It's contained within Ian Maxwell's report on behalf of the Regional Council. I don't want you to miss your lunch. But in it, it talks about tide. No, I've got to tell you this. Sorry. It tells you in Bore 1. There appeared to be 2 tide lines on the wall of the pit. One of the pumps in the dry well chamber wasn't working. The electrician attempted to get it started and it wouldn't. While the electrician was working on getting started, it was noted that the cable ports were of an older type, made of steel in construction. The electrician could actually move the cabling in the ports, suggesting the possibility of poor seals around the cables and the fittings. This was then tested by pouring water down the fittings, which drained straight away into the bore. Now, this is still from a video. If you go on the website, I don't know if you can access the video, I haven't tried to, you'll see that you can see about 6. Oh yeah, yours is much bigger. You can see the detritus on the surface. That got sucked down into the town supply. That's all I'll read from that. On Bore 2, there was broken tar seal around where the road goes around the actual, the top of the dry well chamber. So there was an entry point there as well. The next point I want to make is page 6. So I'm making progress, Rex. Page 6. No well driller. How long have I got?
You can feel my energy.
No well driller had a chance to speak at the public hearings. Russell Bayliss turned up 3 days in a row, and finally at the end of the 3rd day, I heard Justice Stevens say, "No, Mr. Bayliss, we do not require you today. Thank you for coming. Rest assured that we have read your evidence and seen these photographs and viewed the video. We will be hearing tomorrow morning from the Science Caucus, and after we hear from them, we may well decide that your evidence speaks for itself." Now the problem was television was there, Radio New Zealand was there, Dominion Post, Hawke's Bay Today, etc., Freelance, everybody was there, and that information was not able to be explored in examination and cross-examination of a key person who had been down and done a physical inspection, which had not been done even 3 months before the outbreak. So they relied on the Science Caucus. There was no well driller on the Science Caucus. So when we watched that video, can you put up the next slide, please? When we watched that video and the councillors were wholeheartedly saying, we want to fix it, we will do the right thing, what is it they're going to fix if they haven't identified the underlying cause of the contamination? Jumping ahead. If you want to hear more on this, come next Wednesday to the Hastings District Council submission hearings, where Ken and I will be given 10 minutes to speak. We'll be using that time to follow up on some questions that we had in a meeting 2 weeks ago. Okay, this is it. It was a no-fault inquiry. My friend Shirley, an artist in Havelock North, she got the Guillain-Barré syndrome, crippling neurological disorder, through no fault of her own. So we challenged the District Council, the Hawke's Bay District Health Board. Can you help all those people who you have on your records, Nick? Those 4 people were declined ACC. That should be overturned. I don't see that this report will help that, but you might find ways of doing that. Napier City Council has untreated raw sewage going into the Ahuriri. That needs to be looked at. Regional Council, can you get onto them? Regional Council, can you please find out and seal up all old leaking bores? Hastings District Council, are you going to treat the symptoms or the cause? We need a warrant of fitness every year on our bores to find out whether this is happening near the surface where the groundwater can get in and contaminate not just our drinking water, but contaminate the aquifer so that the next person down the underground river channel, their bore picks it up, especially if there's no or low artesian pressure, and especially if you're on the boundary of the confined aquifer. A question I've been asked is, why can't we have drinking water of the same quality as the water bottling companies? Probably a good question to leave you with. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, we do. Thank you, Pauline. In true form, she doesn't... In true form, Pauline doesn't leave us any doubt in what she thinks. So, and that's very good. We'll take, it's lunchtime, but I would like to take 2 questions if someone... Yes, we have one down there from our Hastings District Councillor.
I just want to make sure I'd got your comments correct. I did appreciate your presentation, I thought, and I concur with much of what you said. Yeah. Thank you. Melwood, Mr. Melwood,
yes,
told me that the dye turned up in the bore of his rental property next to the creek. Did you say it didn't turn up?
Mr. Jim Frogley told me it didn't turn up in his bore, which is about 15 metres away.
Okay, well, it seems to be a difference there. Yeah. Thank you.
Do we have one more question before lunch?
One more really good question.
I'm too frightened of you.
Oh, rubbish. Not that I have all the answers, but I'm a quick learner.
Okay, if we don't...
Okay.
Thank you very much, Pauline. You're wonderful. But thank you to all of you out there for your patience. We did run a bit over time. It's lunchtime now, so let's go and have some kai, and you won't have to endure me. The afternoon session, I think, is back to Lawrence. Picked up the time, Lawrence? Okay, thank you.